Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Monday, February 25th Government Relations and Communications Committee meeting. We're finally meeting. Thank you, everybody, for your patience with Mother Nature. And I want to extend a welcome today to my co-chair, Mr. Madden, fellow committee member, Dr. Babson. Got a little tag sticking up back there. I can fix it. And then we have Mr. Batchelor and our administrative liaison, Mr. Petiti. I think our student will be coming along shortly, so, or at least I think she's planning on attending. Is there anything in the way of administrative remarks, Mr. Petiti, that you have for us this evening? No? Okay. Terrific. Then I would ask if we have any public comment in the room today. And I see Mrs. Spurtle is coming forward to share some comment with us.
Good evening, Cindy Spurtle, 106 Valley Forge Terrace, Wayne.
Good evening.
Just a few comments. My question I ask every time is that will responses to questions that need to be answered by the board ever be answered? Ever be given? In other words, when there are board questions, there are blank responses. Except for this month, there is an answer to the yes, and the question was, does the board know that their responses are not being given? The answer was yes. So someday, maybe the answers to the public's questions that can only be answered by the board will be answered. I had one other question, and that was concerning a question that was asked last month of Mr. Petiti about developing a trend line on the use of the website, maybe not just the current information, but what happened prior year, so we can see whether or not people are actually using and communicating with the school district via the website. And I was just reading through one of the handouts tonight, and I'm interested to hear more about some of the meetings. Cost of special education, which has been noticed by many in these meetings for special ed in the school districts, has been growing. And one reason I learned the other day that might be, which was kind of interesting, is the number of aides for special education has increased, almost quadrupled. This individual is an aide, and notice that it's almost a one-on-one, and I don't know whether that's a state requirement or that's what Radnor has decided to do. One-on-one student help. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those questions. And like you said, hopefully our material today will provide some illumination on them. So with that, approval of minutes. Do I have the approval of minutes? Welcome, Abby. So moved. You're good with the minutes, Dr. Babson? Yep. Okay. Abby, welcome. Take your time, catch your breath, no worries. So the minutes are good to go, and we'll move into our first agenda item, which is a review of the February 2nd Delaware County Unites for Public Education event that was held at the DCIU.
Yes, so it was a very successful event. If you can look at the PowerPoint slide here, several pictures from the event. It was at the Delaware County Intermediate Unit on the 2nd of February, and a range of administrators and board members and other advocates for public education came together, along with Mary Gay Scanlon, Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon, who you could see pictured with some of our students there in the right-hand corner underneath the title of the slide, with the PA Schools Works sign. So we had I think, a really robust discussion. Some people spoke. The superintendent from Upper Darby spoke. You could see in the lower right-hand corner, along with some students from Upper Darby, about their experience going there and their feelings about funding in the state. And I say all in all, it was pretty successful. Any questions about that event?
I guess, what's the next?
Well, I just wanted to also just see if Abby had any questions about the event. You probably recognize maybe some of your fellow students who turned out on a chilly Sunday morning to help, and it was great to see them. There actually were some boys who showed up. They just didn't stick around for the picture, so it was a co-ed turnout, and they were really engaged, and it was really wonderful to see those students come and learn about the funding challenges that we have in Pennsylvania, because they are unfortunately the ones who are suffering from those funding challenges, and they also had the benefit of learning from their compatriots in the Upper Darby School District how it looks in other districts that aren't quite as fortunate as ours. So it was, I think, illuminating for them. There was a quote in one of the write-ups about the event that from Donna Cooper, who's the executive director of Public Citizens for Children and Youth, and that's one of the main organizations sponsoring the PA Schools Work campaign. And she said that she's been doing this advocacy since 1999, and it was probably the largest meeting ever held with residents across Delaware County to remedy the funding situation that she'd ever seen. So we were really thrilled about that, and it was, there were people there in all sorts of capacities from districts all throughout the county and even beyond. There's somebody from PSBA who's a school board president in Montgomery County who was there, and of course Congresswoman Scanlon came in from Washington for this, so it was really wonderful. And the next steps are PCCOI is working on that as we speak. As part of the event, one of the activities was that everybody was supposed to write these pledge cards, where we broke into stakeholder groups. There was a group of school officials and board members. There were a group of community members there, and everybody was supposed to come up with ways that they were going to continue to carry out this advocacy within their home districts. And PCCY at this point is compiling a master list of all of those pledges for things people can do, and will then send them back out in case anybody needs a reminder of what they pledged to do to carry this campaign forward. And we're hoping to have those by our March Delaware County School Board's Legislative Council meeting. In addition, they are trying to schedule a day on the Hill for advocacy of this, and hopefully other counties will look at the success that we had in Delaware County in raising awareness and replicate it in their own counties. Because as we'll talk about a little bit later, the governor came out with his budget proposal for this year, and while there are some bright spots to it, it still falls short of what PA Schools Work campaign was asking for. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later, so there's still more advocacy to be done, for sure. But based on, and then we also have a resolution that we're all trying to pass in our respective districts, and that's on our agenda to discuss tonight too. But does that answer your question, Chuck? And is there anything you wanted to add?
Very good.
Having been there? Yep. No? Abby, anything else? No? Good? Okay. So, great. That covers that topic on our agenda. And boy, it seems like a lifetime ago. February 2nd, we're almost at a date. March now. So anyway, all right, so we will move on to the second item on our agenda, and that is the resolution, the aforementioned resolution urging the General Assembly to adequately invest in public schools and its students across the Commonwealth. Turn that over to Mr. Petiti for that item as well.
Yeah, so if you skip through the two articles in the packet that give more information about the event on the 2nd, you'll come to, and then through the photos, you'll come to the, and I'll skip to it on the slide as well, the resolution that PA Schools Work has put forth as a template for districts to use. And several districts have used it. Here we see Clarendon City has used just filling in the blank of the resolution and then signing it. We've had so far located 20 different districts that have passed resolutions, either just using the template or with minor, very, very minor changes. And one of those minor changes came in a little bit later after this PowerPoint was created and posted, so it's an additional piece of paper that you'll see in the back that has some highlighted information on it. This is a kind of hybrid model between the PA Schools Work one that you see up on the screen here and what Phoenixville recently passed, I think just last week or a couple weeks ago, very recently. They had added that line you see in the third paragraph that specifies our special education funding. They added one on Phoenixville for obviously their figures. So today we got those figures from our business office so we could decide if we want to just go with what many districts have done, and that's just use PA Schools work and change the name of our district and the date, or if we want to add this line inspired by Phoenixville. And obviously the discussion about do we want to pass the resolution generally, of course, to see if we can move that forward, if we do, to get on the board meeting agenda tomorrow night.
Great, thank you. Like Michael said, passing a resolution by the school board is one of the key action items as part of the PA Schools Work funding campaign. And so I guess it's up to this committee to decide if we'd like to move this forward for tomorrow's board meeting. And like Mr. Petiti said, we looked at customizing it to really drive home some data that pertains specifically to Radnor and the challenges around funding that we have here in our district, while recognizing that every district has those challenges. There's the opportunity to customize it like some other districts have with some numbers specific to Radnor. So I'd like to get some feedback from everybody on the committee to see if you would have any questions, comments, thoughts about the resolution in general, and if how you feel about moving it on for a full board vote tomorrow night. Maybe I'll start with Dr. Babson to my left.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think it's great that we're doing this, and I think that any way that we can tailor this to reflect the specific situation of Radnor is great. And I'm just a strong proponent of us moving this forward for tomorrow night. I think that the language that's included is good and reflects our particular situation. I don't think that anything additional beyond the template that you mentioned, Michael, and that's up on the screen here, would need to be added at this point. I think that it's fairly detailed without being too detailed. Those are my thoughts.
That sounds great. Abby, do you have any thoughts? Please don't feel any pressure, but if you do, we always love hearing your voice.
I just want to say that I agree with Mr. Babson, and I think it's pretty powerful, the words in it, especially the 46 among the 50 states. So I don't know, especially when I forget her name when she came and told us that. So I think that it's very, like, it'll make them see that we need the money for the schools.
Great, thank you, Abby. Chuck, do you have any thoughts on it?
No, I also agree. I think it's a great idea. One thing I would like, and it doesn't have to be in here, okay, but if you look at it and we get $44,000 for 4.7 million increase, right? So that means that over time, say that we would still continue to get 44,000, and the increase is going to be more than 4.7 million. So if you look at that in 8 years, it would be interesting to see. And I don't need this, but it might be something that we'll talk to our business people about. It'd be interesting to see how much that actually did cost us over 8 years. In other words, if you put in, we got 40,000 for 8 years, right? 320,000, and it went up 32 million. So that's a little more staggering, the amount that we had to pay that was extra compared to what we received. Can you understand my logic of what I'm saying?
We may have kind of did that, a similar impactful data exercise earlier when I looked at if you just took the number divided by 8 and you just said on average per year, the number was, I think, 5,600 or so for the state funding, and the number for the districts, I think, for our district was 550,000 or something like that.
Right.
So, per year over those 8 years, if you want to extrapolate it that way,
yeah.
Which is a kind of a powerful
I
thing.
was just thinking about it, yeah. I think this is great just the way it is. I'm not saying to change this piece. I'm fine with this.
Okay. And for people who haven't seen this because it wasn't published, and I don't know if anybody's watching the meeting or not, but for the sake of anybody not watching it, what we're talking about is the fact that for Radnor, State funding of special education has increased only $44,830 over the last 8 years, above and beyond what we'd otherwise be getting, despite the fact that our costs of special education have been increasing over the course of 8 years to the tune of $4.7 million. And that's really the essence of the campaign, which is the state is ranked 46 out of 50 states in America in terms of what it contributes to helping to fund its schools. And that's what we're trying to say, is that this is not enough. While we appreciate any increased funding, it still doesn't level the playing field in terms of taking the pressures off of local taxpayers and living up to the original commitments that the state was supposed to make to help us fund our schools. And this is a vivid example of where that funding really dramatically falls short.
Yes, and if I could, for those who can go to our agenda materials, there's a big packet of a primer on funding and fair funding in Pennsylvania that we included with the materials tonight. So, you know, it can be a kind of complex, complicated issue. So please take a look at that attachment. It gives a good rundown of the methodology and how the whole thing works.
Okay, so let's move this forward tomorrow night. If Mr. Batchelor, all good by you? Okay. We'll put this on the agenda for tomorrow night. There's a placeholder for it, I believe. It's just that the resolution itself wasn't put on. So
Yes.
that's great. We appreciate everybody's feedback on the resolution. Okay, let's move into the next agenda item, which is a review of Governor Wolf's 2019-20 state budget proposal.
Okay, I have no slide for this, but I will go over, excuse me, some general information regarding the budget. The total budget is proposed at $85.8 billion. The general fund, $634.14 billion, which is an increase of $927.36 million over last year, or 2.78%. In terms of education, 37% of the general fund would be education expenditures, around $12.72 billion. And that's $200 million increase in basic education. Although, like Ms. Goldman said earlier, PA Schools Work calls for an increase of at least $3 billion in PA and basic education funding. So the budget proposal is $200 million, so you can see off a large degree there. The special education funding increase is around $50 million is proposed, and that follows $90 million in funding increases over the last 4 years. And then there's some money for $50 million for pre-K and Head Start, pre-K Counts program and Head Start, $8 million for Stay in PA, $10 million for PA Smart, which is a STEM and computer science program, and $7 million for the PA State System of Higher Education. It's an education-related expenses. So there's been some concerns already voiced, most recently in an article in the Inquirer from the 23rd, regarding the lack of funding, even at that 4%, I believe it was, increase from last year. And again, if you look at those numbers that the Schools Work campaign is asking for, it comes nowhere near that part. So there's already some pushback about the proposal. But that gives you an idea of where Governor Wolf is with funding education currently.
Okay, any commentary from the committee on any of that? I did want to add something that just Mr. Petiti, you had mentioned that the PA Schools Work campaign was advocating for a $400 million increase this year in funding, and over a period of time they want to see that grow into the billions. But for this year, $400 million, and that the governor has put forth $200 million as the increase. So we're halfway to what PA Schools Work is advocating for, and it wasn't a random number that PA Schools Work put forth. One of the challenges is that that $200 million is not going to necessarily translate into classrooms, because what we know is that $18 million of that $200 million is going to be used to fund ready-to-learn block grants for school districts, and another $13.9 million is proposed to increase the minimum teacher salary for those districts who have teachers who are not yet earning $45,000 a year as a minimum salary. This is supposed to be a subsidy out of that 200 million to help fund that. So when you take that money out of the 200 million, you're left with 168 million. And so the question that came to my mind was, how much of that is what's our pension liability? Because how much of that is going to needed to offset our pension liability? And according to PSBA, about 130 million is going to be our pension liability across the state this year. So when you subtract 130 million from the 68 million, you have about 38 million left spread among 500 school districts across Pennsylvania, which stand a chance of getting into the classroom. And that's why PA Schools Work is asking for 400 million, because they know that we have the pension obligation, but they want to see more money than 38 million going into the classrooms and having a direct impact on the students. So I just want to be mindful when we hear these numbers. Some might think, wow, that's a lot of money. But when you break it down, there are a lot of different places where that money is going. And of course, we're most focused on having that money go into the classroom for each and every one of our students. So wanted to mention that commentary on the basic education part of the budget. And just another reminder that the special education increase was 50 million. PA Schools Work was asking for 100 million. And of course, our resolution speaks to why we're looking for so much more in special education. So walking the line of being very grateful that at least there are increases, PA Schools Work response to that was basically that while we appreciate the increases, we're not there yet. And so we still have a lot of work to do to try to convince the legislature and the governor to work together to get those numbers up, even beyond what they already are.
Can I ask about the $3 billion number that I saw somewhere on their materials? Is that over a course of time then? Could you help with clarifying that for everyone, since that was a number that I had seen?
Yes, I don't remember the length of time, but in order to get to the level of equity and adequacy that is at the crux of the campaign, where there is enough money going through the fair funding formula so that all school districts come out from being underwater, that's where the $3 billion is. I don't know if it's the next 8 years or 10 years, but to bring some school districts that are really underwater at this point, they want to see the new money, which goes through the funding formula, and is redistributed much more proportionately to need than it is when it doesn't necessarily go through the funding formula, to have that money get up into the billions over a number of years. Yes.
Thank you.
But they 400 million for starters this year, and I think it's an 8 to 10 after that. If you do the math, will get us up to 3 billion with some increases built in.
And 200 million is still a pretty large shortfall, I would say. So still a large number that they're missing in that recommended yearly increase.
Yes, especially when you back out the other pieces of the 200 million that are not going into our classrooms, which is where the funding shortfall really manifests itself in terms of student need.
Yes.
So that is, does anybody have any other commentary? Just really important, given the nature of our committee, to know what the governor's budget proposal is and how it relates to what else we're talking about in terms of the PA Schools Work campaign. And that's hopefully a good overview for everyone. Yeah, okay, terrific. So then we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is a report on the National School Boards Association's recent Advocacy Institute. And we are fortunate to have Dr. Babson representing our wonderful district in Washington, D.C. in January. Take it away, Dr. Babson.
Sure. No, thank you. And before I start mentioning the report and giving some details from that, I want to thank Superintendent Batchelor and the district for sponsoring my attendance at the event. It was a great event. I learned a lot. It was a very positive experience, I think, not only personally, but also for the district, too. So just want to put that out there. And second of all, again, for those listening, watching, right here, Amy and Chuck, we have two experts with years and years of knowledge on special education provision, access, funding, policy, and especially Chuck, who's attended the Federal Relations Network conference, the conference that I attended for years. Many people were asking for you, Chuck. Your presence was missed. And so I felt like I had a bit of a responsibility here to, there was a torch that I needed to carry, and I needed to represent well, not only the district, but also that precedent. So with that in mind, I put together a report of not only what the conference was about, the goal of the conference, but also a little bit about what I was able to contribute. So I'm just going to take it away. I'm going to read the report. Before I delve in, though, I just want to piggyback, maybe I can jump off of what was said earlier, which is that the way that education policy works in our country is that it's very decentralized. In other words, it was built to be pushed down to the local level as much as possible. And while that is good for local autonomy, what it can bring up are challenges of how you balance the funding pot, so to speak. So how much federal money is going to a local district, how much state money is going to a local district, how much are local taxes providing for those operational funds of the local district. And so that balancing act between local control and autonomy and federal funding, that was sort of at the heart of this particular conference, and especially this issue of special education funding in particular, okay? So let me just kind of take it away here with this report. So the National School Boards Association holds a yearly event for members of its Federal Relations Network, or FRN. In years past, it was called the FRN Conference. Now it is called the NSBA Advocacy Institute. You need to change the name once in a while to freshen it up, I guess. It takes place over a long weekend in January, Sunday through Tuesday in Washington, D.C., and brings together several hundred school board members from around the country. And the purpose of the three-day event is to provide advocacy training sessions, including information about public education causes and advice about lobbying, as a lead-up to crossing town to Capitol Hill, and in prearranged meetings, directly ask congressional representatives to legislatively support those causes. So it's directly going to the representatives and their staff and saying, we are from this district, here are our issues, and this is what you should be supporting legislatively to support those issues. So state-level boards associations arranged these meetings, so PSBA, and they included multiple school board members from various districts around the state. So the PSBA assisted in organizing the meetings for our local group, which comprised 7 school board members from Southeast PA and 2 representatives from the Delaware County Intermediate Unit. We met with staff from the office of Senator Pat Toomey, Senator Bob Casey, and Representative Mary Gay Scanlon, who was mentioned earlier. Okay? So the target cause for this year's Advocacy Institute was the modernization and full funding of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. IDEA was signed in 1975 by President Gerald Ford. At the heart of the IDEA is the mandate. Okay, so this is what was talked about earlier, about mandated special education for students with disabilities. This is where that term mandate comes in. So mandates that every child receive what's called FAPE, or Free and Appropriate Public Education. Okay? It has been 15 years since IDEA was updated to accommodate new scientific findings about learning differences like diagnoses, treatments, causes, and changes in government financing, educational assessment, and societal circumstances in the lives of children and youth, most notably the internet and how that has changed learning and social life. Okay? So IDEA has never been funded to its recommended amount for total expenditures for guaranteeing FAPE for all learners. Let me just repeat that. It has never been funded. IDEA has never been funded to its recommended amount for total expenditures for guaranteeing free and appropriate public education for all learners. All right? So currently, districts can only rely on IDEA-approved federal funding for covering about 15% of these expenditures, whereas IDEA was written to provide 40%. So going back to that issue of the balance, right? Local control, good, but federal dollars are still supposed to be supporting about 40% of these costs, okay? So if you think about it, that's a 25% gap that needs to be addressed. So before attending the conference, I met with our Director of Special Education, Jenny Lesage, to discuss ways our district has been engaging with IDEA, as well as more general questions about special education provision in the district. And among a number of issues I could have focused on in the 3 Capitol Hill meetings, I chose to highlight the need to support teachers in their drafting and fulfillment of Student Individualized Educational Programs, or IEPs. IDEA is meant, a lot of acronyms here, so alphabet soup. IDEA is meant to ensure FAPE, okay, as we mentioned earlier, but other federal education laws are meant to reach the same goal. For example, the Higher Education Opportunity Act of 2008 outlines teacher education and training policies intended to ensure faithful enactment of IDEA. So proper updating and funding of IDEA would complement the support that teachers receive through HEOA as they draft and fulfill IEPs. Got that? Lots of acronyms there. But the point is that fully funding IDEA would positively affect our work in the district and what we do, especially around that, that task of crafting IEPs. All right? So I thought the conference time was very valuable time, well spent. The workshops and talks I thought were very helpful and informative. I learned additional information about familiar topics such as high school to college transition, which is a specialty of mine, but also new information about many others, such as IDEA. For example, special education is not one of my areas of expertise, so I was able to learn a lot about it. So I think the most important takeaway from the weekend was that IDEA was written to be a powerful law. And to recap from above, I think it's a big problem that has never been fully funded and that it has not been updated since 2004. Now, considering the training itself, I think the most valuable insight was that when aiming to persuade a good, detailed-filled case study or narrative about one individual rather than maybe getting too bogged down in numbers and figures or this group and that group, by focusing on one individual and his or her story, that was a really powerful way to persuade and to have these discussions, especially about very important issues like special education, IDEA, but I thought it would be applicable to any kind of conversation, especially in a policy setting. Okay, so I think hearing some scientific support for this idea and examples of this strategy was very helpful, especially for my approach when meeting with the congressional staff. And I thought it was very effective in driving home the importance of full funding of IDEA and public education in general. So going forward, I had a meeting with Jenny just to kind of debrief a little bit and share a bit of this with her. I shared this report with her. She said it was all wrong and that I had to go back to the drawing board. I was really disappointed. No, just kidding. But I was really, I think, pleased with the whole effort. And I think that Jenny, with her expertise, it was good to kind of bounce some ideas off of her as the expert in the room on these issues and her vast experience in special education. And her question was, well, how do we kind of keep this train going? And the bottom line is through contact. So through communicating with the congressional staff on a fairly regular basis, maybe on a quarterly basis, and events like the local events where
Good
Mary Gay
segue.
Scanlon was. Yeah.
Into our next agenda item.
Yeah.
Just want to also thank you, thank you, Dr. Babson, thank you, Andrew, for that. As you were speaking and going through the whole thing too, it just also, I connected to the last, we've been doing some, board trainings and info sessions on special education and looking specifically not only at the broader IDA and how its impact has been on us as a school district, but also looking at how does it play out for us in our school district and our special education programming, and that shift to having Jenny now as Director of Special Ed and Assistant Director of Special Education, devoting a little bit more time and really personnel to that topic. So I think there's been a lot of things coming together that have given us an opportunity to have a little more focus as a board, focus as an administrative team, and looking at what type of services we're providing as a district in this area. So, I was thinking back to that presentation, a lot of similar aspects, so thank you for that.
Sure. Can I would also like to thank Dr. Babson for his report. It's very well done, and you show enthusiasm, and which is one of the reasons why I asked you if you would be interested, because sometimes a new set of eyes on a particular issue is something that is of value. And now we have more people who are beginning to understand the special education system. One of the things that impressed me was the fact that you brought up about teacher support. And I think that's something that we need to look at as specifically in Radnor as we move along, because of the statistics that we see about the burnout in special education teachers. So we want to have on the horizon for us, or what are some of the things that we're doing to make sure that our staff is at its peak, okay?
I will just echo that too. It's not only just the burnout in special ed. We're finding it very hard to find. I mean, special education is becoming an area where we're not alone. We just had a discussion at our IU, and other superintendents was sharing this, the struggles they're having finding special education teachers, that when there's an opening, finding the people that are certified and going into the area, and it's something that is impacting all of us right now.
Well, which comes to what our discussion would be, reasons why, if you're a special education teacher, you would come to Radnor. Because what we're doing is we're making sure that not only are you totally prepared, but that you're functioning at your peak, because we have the supports in place to make sure that that happens, which will make our recruitment of special ed teachers easier. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Babson. It's great to see you so enthusiastic on your first road trip, and hopefully it'll be one of many. We welcome anyone who wants to advocate on behalf of public education, and I think you've got your membership card already, so let's go. We've got some more things lined up for you to do. You do it well. So moving on then to the next and final item on our agenda, the update on the legislative breakfast planning. Mr. Petiti?
Yes, so 6 years, this will be our sixth annual legislative breakfast, and through the years, on the slide here, you can see we've had our share of legislators come, and some old faces that that are no longer with the district. You see right in the center there's good old Dr. Kane, in that one picture to the right there. But it's a successful event that we hope to continue to keep successful, and hopefully the best one yet this year, coming up on April 5th, Friday, April 5th. We had some planning going on during the interim of the initial scheduled GRCC and this one, and we wanted to confirm the date as soon as we could, because we had three, O'Mara, Leach, and Vitale, all confirmed for the 5th. And we are waiting to hear from a rep from Congresswoman Scanlon's office. We had decided to open up this breakfast to federal representatives as well this year. And if it turns out that we can't get them because of a conflict with the state rep schedules, we could try to bring them or invite them to a GRCC meeting perhaps later on in the year as a standalone invitation. But so it's going to be at Radnor Elementary School at 7:45 a.m. on the 5th. And the next steps would be going over our possible agenda items. I think we already have two, one being the fair funding and the other being the potential IDEA funding and modernization. And then we can obviously bat around some other agenda topics that are pertinent and topical to what's going on in the field of education right now. Yeah.
Okay, terrific. Abby, you have get your calendar marked for that. And we will be working with Mr. Petiti going forward on that. Oops, losing my pen there. So thank you very much for that, Mr. Petiti. And I guess, I don't know why it's not appeared as new business. So the next item on the agenda is new business. Does anybody have new business? There was something I wanted to mention, but I certainly want to make sure I'm not preempting anybody else who has some new business to discuss. Anybody? No? Okay, so I just wanted to put something on our government relations radar that's come up, and that is a bill that is in the that is gaining some traction. Perhaps you've heard about it, Mr. Batchelor, but it's a cyber education reimbursement bill, actually, that has been introduced both in the House and Senate. In fact, on the House Education side, it's been introduced by the new chairman of the House Education Committee. And this bill would require that if a school district offered a full-time cyber education program, then if a family wanted to send one of their children to a cyber education, have them enroll in a cyber education program, currently what happens is that the school district has to reimburse the family for that cyber education program. But if this legislation were to go into effect, become law, then the family would need to enroll the student in the district's full-time cyber education program, thereby taking the burden of the cyber education payments off the district, which can amount to hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, depending on the school district in Pennsylvania. And the representative who introduced this, who's the chair of the Education Committee, comes from Erie, and I think Erie's annual cyber education bills are well in the millions of dollars, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, I forget the exact number. So he's very invested in having this legislation move forward. And that's sort of the way it goes when you're chair of a committee, that you get to decide which legislation of all the pieces that are drafted move forward. So that's why we're watching this. He's been trying to get this going for 4, 5, 6 years, and now he's chair. So guess what? This is probably going to be fast-tracked, and actually, I think it's something that we ought to look into as a district as well, and see how it impacts us personally, perhaps, let alone support our neighbors, because we do have other districts within the county who are spending a ton of money that could otherwise be going other places than funding cyber education programs. So I just wanted to put that on everyone's radar. I think PSBA is really getting prepared and ready to address this issue, and I've been hearing a lot of the chatter at the School Board's Legislative Council level, so I just wanted to put that on our radar in case anything happens between now and March or April or whatever. So,
If I may, I just want to say something briefly. So, a long time ago, I was director of research for one of the very first cyber charter schools in the country, called Electronic Classroom of Tomorrow, based in Columbus, Ohio, back in 2003. And that experience allowed me to learn a lot about not only school financing, the funding formulas, which, if you think Wall Street derivatives are complex, the funding formulas can be very complex. But my point in just chiming in here is just to highlight the point that you said, just to kind of underline it a little bit more, which is that when a child decides, or when their parents decide to have their child attend a cyber charter in a public district instead of the district school, the money that would follow that child, so to speak, into the school and contribute to that school building's operating budget goes to the cyber charter school rather than the school. So in other words, that is a loss of revenue for the school district. And it's just, again, just for whoever might be watching, it's just to highlight that point, that this is a very, very important issue. And we want to respect, on the one hand, parental autonomy, as we were talking about earlier a little bit, but on the other hand, I think it's a key issue about how we think that balancing act should be made, right? And just to point out that fact, I don't know if that's clear to many people.
and in this day and age, more and more school districts are creating cyber education programs, full-time cyber education programs. And so if a district can provide the same service, as opposed to having to fund a family getting it elsewhere, that's really what this legislation is intended to do, is save the districts that money if they're already providing that same service.
Now, many years ago, there was created a group of districts. I think it may have been Delaware County Intermediate Unit that took the lead, and they formed their own cyber school, which we had access to, any of the districts that were in Delaware County. And I think it is still up and running out of Chester County, IU, but I'm not sure. So my question would be, even if it's not a district run, but if it's a cyber school that we're part of, whether that would count or not. As we move along, I don't need an answer now, but if you could look into that for me, because I remember being part of that discussion. Was my friend Walt Walt Senkow, when he from Upper Darby, and he was the one that pushed to have us do that. And I'm not sure whether it's still in existence or not, but that would be something that if each district had to specifically have their own, or whether they could come together. For instance, Garnet Valley has a fantastic program. Maybe you could piggyback on that. I don't know, just a thought. Okay, thanks.
So just I found my notes, the House bill is 526 and the Senate bill is 34. So just bills to watch, because it sounds like they're on the move. All right, that was my new business. Does anybody else have any new business? No? Okay. Well, then let's engage our final public comment period. Get it started. Do we have any final public comment?
Cindy Spurtle, Wayne. You had mentioned, may I talk to Michael? That Phoenixville had made a change to the to this document, and you've included that change. I couldn't find the change from what was on the slide, and if you pointed it out, I missed it. And if it's not that important, or you
quickly
included
answer that for
whatever
you.
addition they made to the resolution.
Yes, so the addition would be, right in the center there is the highlighted sentence about special education costs.
Oh, but that was for Radnor. They
That-
added it for themselves?
They,
and you-
yeah,
okay.
we were inspired by that. They specified it for Phoenixville's numbers. We just
Thank you.
took the idea.
A question about the legislative breakfast, which I raised at the beginning of the meeting. Is it possible, would you ask again or consider public being invited to this? I'm sure there probably isn't going to be an overload of public, but there may be members of the public who would be interested. I think maybe the legislators might like to talk to the public that they serve. It was very interesting to learn about the two bills. Thank you very much. I have two grandsons who are cyber school graduates in the Avon Grove. They have bricks and mortar, cyber and bricks and mortar. They're older now. They've gone through college and very successful jobs they both have. And their younger brother needed to be in this cyber for an IEP. And so that worked better for him than the school. So they're important. I like the idea, as Radnor even talked about, or considered working with other school districts in the county to put together something along the line that Chuck was talking about. I believe they're very important. If there's a way, I like the idea that the bill with the state would reimburse and the district would not have to pay for it. Thank you.
Oh, that concludes our GRCC meeting for February. And Mr. Petiti, what did you say the date was next month, the 12th?
Yes.
March 12th.
March 12th.
Okay, assuming there's no snow again. We'll see you all on March 12th. Okay, thank you. Have a good night, everyone.